get too many
30 seconds.
You're the boss.
Oh.
Is everybody in? Everybody in the picture? So I was afraid of.
You're fine. I'll wait for you. Backing up. It's on a 5 count when he's done. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're on.
Welcome to the Autosportradio.com 2018 show. I'm your host, Don Kay. We are live from McGillivray Speedway, 30th and High School in the beautiful town of Speedway, Indiana. Tonight's show is presented by Honda HPD, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Verizon IndyCar Series, and SVRA. A couple things to mention in case you hadn't started the countdown. There's 31 days until the opening race at St. Petersburg. And also this weekend, you'll be able to, I think it's Friday and Saturday, you'll be able to see the test from Phoenix by going to racecontrol.indycar.com, and they'll have it streaming, and you will get to see what's going on, how the car works, and have a good time seeing how the new car is going to work. I want to also pass on my condolences to the Schmidt family. My friend Rusty Schmidt passed away Sunday. He came here and he took a rookie test one year. He used to drive the Rolex 24 for many years, was a Corvette guy, but he passed away out in Colorado. And I went to the announcement today of PNC Bank is going to be the primary sponsor for Scott Dixon's Ganassi racing car team. So that was a good announcement, and they say there's a couple more coming, so that should be interesting. I want to remind you, if you have trouble like I do with a computer, and if you know as little as I do with a computer, I got the solution. It's Computer Overdrive, located on Crawfordsville and Lyndhurst on the northeast corner. Call Jack, tell him your problem, make an appointment. He can fix it. Number's 317-328-0766. And if you have any interest in drones and what drones can do and how they work, you go to the back half of the office and see Mark. He can tell you all you need to know about drones. And to keep up with everything that's going on in the world of IndyCar Series and the Mazda Road to Indy program, you got to subscribe to Trackside Online. Just go to tracksideonline.com and sign up, and it's only like $25 a year, and you will find out all of the PR from all of the teams. You get it all, everything that's going on, you'll keep up with it. And if you can't wait to see a dentist, I highly recommend the Indy Dental Group. You gotta call Dr. Jack and Dr. Liz. Call their office. We go there, and it's phenomenal. Their number is 317-846-6125. You won't be sorry you went there. Next week, my first scheduled guest is Alex Damron. He was the Director of Communications for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I'm going to find out more about the tour of the green flag. It's going to travel the world. Find out what they got in mind for that. So it'll be kind of interesting. And I got another couple people I'm talking to, so we'll get something going. My first guest this evening. I'll start at the far end of the table. He is a graduate of Indiana University. He was head of the family business, a grocery store, many stores. In his early life, he got hooked on racing. And between selling lettuce and racing cars, he did quite well. He was president of the United States Auto Club for a number of years, and now he works for the state in the motorsports and economic development. So we'll see how that's going, or find out about his career in the racing world. Please welcome Mr. Rollie Helbling.
Well, thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to be back.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I was back. I think the last time I was here was when I was the head of USAC, and so it's great to be back. And I can honestly say now that I've been gone from USAC for about 10 years, and I've got all but 2 of my friends back.
And sitting next to me is a young man who has had a phenomenal career in racing. He was a 1979 USAC National Midget Champion. He finished runner-up, I think, 3 times. And he was telling a story that, I forget what track you were at, the last race of the year, and Mel Kenyon gets a telegram congratulating him on the championship, his 6th championship. Guess what? He didn't win. Steve won. So he went up and told Mel what he could do with that telegram. He's had a phenomenal career, raced for over 30 years, and he's agreed for the 2nd time to come and stop by. Please welcome Mr. Steve Latshaw.
Thank you, Don. Nice to be back.
So both you guys, you said, got started racing because your father was involved in one way or another.
Yeah, I tell you, my dad, like Raleigh, I think, started taking me to races when I was 4 years old. So I would go to Springfield and all the midget races around the area, and so I just grew up being a fan myself. So one day I saw quarter midgets running down at the Meadow Shopping Center. So I ran home and got my dad and brought him down there to see these little cars going around a parking lot at the shopping center. And the next day we were off and running.
What got you started? I mean, you were in the grocery business. How did
Right.
you
Well,
get
that
to
was our
racing?
family business, but
Right.
my father also was a racing enthusiast, and we would go to races. And I can tell you the first USAC race I ever attended was at the Terre Haute Action Track. Jim Hurtubise won the feature, A.J. Foyt was 2nd, and Parnelli Jones was 3rd. And from there on, I was hooked. And my father bought me a quarter midget, and it didn't take long for me to discover that I probably better not be a driver. So, and then it went on from there, and so I had talked him into buying a midget, and we had an old Curtis Copy Chevy 2, and we had no idea what to do with it, but we bought it, and we were trying to race it, and with very little success, and so anyway, that was when I was a teenager, and then shortly thereafter, my father died very suddenly. And but I always knew that he had a great love for racing, and just to kind of start a story off, my father died right before I was to go to Purdue University as a freshman, and of course our home was down in Vincennes. So and I'm an only child, so I decided that rather than go to Purdue, which I was supposed to go in a couple of weeks, it might be best if I went to Vincennes University for the first couple of years. So I enrolled very quickly at Vincennes University, and shortly after I got there, as a freshman in college, I met this little short guy who I heard also was racing midgets, who was going to Vincennes University, who lived in Indianapolis.
A little short guy. Could he drive? The hell, how big he was, could he drive?
Did you win your first race?
Did I what now?
Did you win your first race?
I won my 2nd one.
Okay.
First time I ever got behind the wheel, we went to a little dirt track, Macon, Illinois, and you always remember when you start out. So the first race I ever ran there was with St. Louis Racing Association. I remember I qualified 13th. I finished like 3rd in the heat, and I finished 10th in the feature, and that was a dirt race. And the very next night, we went to Bunker Hill, half-mile paved, and that's where I had all my quarter midget experience. We went up there, and I had fast time, won the heat, won the feature, and won the dash. So we were off and running.
Which was best for you driving? Do you like dirt primarily, or were you a pavement guy, or didn't you care?
Well, I love big tracks, big dirt tracks. I love running them, but also I'd say I've had more success with the pavement, and I like both, but I far more preferred big half-mile to mile tracks.
And you drove Silver Crown off and on.
I did, and had little success there, but spent most of my time with my dirt car experience on the outside of the wall instead of inside the wall. So
They don't count that real well, do they?
No, they don't.
When they
It
go to the
doesn't-
pay window, they said, huh?
that didn't pay much at all out there. So
Raleigh, when you got to the ownership of cars, this monster sitting next to you drove for you off and on for quite a number of years.
Well, after my father passed away, we had the old Curtis Chevy too, and of course I was a college student and tried to race it a little bit, not very successfully. So after about a year, I had a chance to sell it, and I sold it to, and this is an interesting story, I sold this car to a guy who had, again, never owned a race car before, who lived in Boonville, Indiana, and his name was Blackie Fortune. And so that's what got Blackie started. And then so I got out of college and then got active in our family business. And I was going to the races with Steve all the time. And we made a lot of trips to the West Coast and all around the country. And I was just trying to help him out, learn a little bit. And then in I believe it was 77 or 78, Steve was moving up from the Sescos to the Volkswagens, and he had a new Volkswagen, so I bought his old Edmund Sesco. So that was my first actual USAC car.
How was he as an owner?
Hey, couldn't have been a better guy. We've spent all of our racing career practically together there for first 10 years, and but no, Raleigh's about as easy to go on as there ever was to drive for. And come in saying something's wrong with the car. You know how a driver is. He's always uptight about it, adrenaline flowing, and you start complaining about and this and that. And I only saw all the years that I raced especially with Raleigh, I only saw him get upset one time. So he was great to drive for.
Was he upset with you?
No, he wasn't, thank goodness. And where was that at, Raleigh?
Oh, well, that wasn't the only time, but we traveled around a lot. You know, after I bought Steve's car, and then later on transitioned up, and especially when we were running the Volkswagen cars, and we both had Kenyon chassis. And Steve drove for me a few times whenever his car was out of commission or something, and we just wanted to race, and Steve would jump in mine. And but a lot of times we just traveled around. But I'm trying to think when that might have been when I got mad. I probably had a bent-up race car at the time. But.
Well, it was something about, all I can remember was you got mad because I was in the race itself, but my dad was telling me about it, saying, and you said something, is that my race car? Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Louisville. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. The first race of the 1989 season, we were down at Louisville Motor Speedway on that little, at that time it was a quarter-mile track, and I hadn't decided who was going to drive for me that year, and it was right before the Kentucky Derby. It was about the 1st of May, and so Kenny Schrader, and actually the first USAC race I ever won, Kenny was driving for me. And so Kenny was then off racing in NASCAR, but we all know how Kenny loves to race. And so Kenny was just going to do a one-off for me that night. And about 3 or 4 days before the race, Kenny calls and he said, darn, Raleigh, he says, I'm not going to be able to make it, and I've had something come up. So I called another driver who I had a lot of pavement. And we had a brand new Challenger with a Pontiac engine in it, and we felt like we were, ready to go. So anyway, we get down there, and we didn't have a good night. And we qualified horrible. We finished horrible in the heat race. And I think in the feature, when the checker flag flew, we finished like 12th or 13th. What was really significant was what happened after the checkered flag flew, when I looked up in the first turn from the pits that were outside of the track, and I saw a car go flying into the first turn fence, took down the stoplight, and I thought, what idiot is that? And then I started looking around, and I couldn't find my car. And I recognized the belly pan. And so anyway, we destroyed a car that night, and of course the next big race was the night before the 500, and this was a time that Bob East had just left Challenge Racing, and Bob was just starting to build cars here, and he and Janice had moved to Indianapolis, and so Bob was down there that night, and he introduced me that night to a fella and his stepson. And just a quick casual introduction, and that was John Bickford and Jeff Gordon. So after the race, got Bob together, and I said, Bob, we got to have a new car for the night before the 500. And he had just started building midgets. I think he had one out. So he said, let me see what I can do. We'll get started. And so we started building a new car for the night before the 500. And I think this was either the second or third Beast ever built. So about a week later, Bob calls me up and he says, who's going to drive for you at the night before the 500? And I said, not the guy that was driving at Louisville. And he said, well, you remember I introduced you to that little fella named Jeff Gordon. And I said, oh, yeah, that's that 13, 14-year-old kid that's been racing sprint cars, right? And Bob says, no, I think he's 16 or 17. So he said, what do you think about maybe letting Jeff drive for you the night before the 500? And oh, boy, I don't know. I said, we're off to a bad start, and, you know, I've heard about him, and I've heard he's pretty good, but I don't think he's ever raced a midget before. So Bob and I talked, and I'd known Bob for a couple years from buying the Challenger cars from him, and he said, well, let's give him a try. I said, all right, Bob, I trust your judgment. So I called Jeff, and I said, I'm going to be up in Indianapolis in a couple days. I'm bringing Bob some parts, and let's meet up. So we did, and we decided to do a one-race deal, and that would be the night before the 500. We finished the car 2 days before. The first time we ever fired it was in the parking lot outside of where Bob's shop was, which was behind the Napa store that Steve Stapp owned in Brownsburg. And the car turned out, it was a beautiful little car. And so we went out to Raceway Park. There'd been no testing, no practicing, just hot laps, qualify, go. And I think some of you can remember the story. We went out there, and Jeff had never raced on a paved track before and never raced a midget before. And 61 cars, fast time. And at that time, the night before the 500, the procedure was if you were in the top 12, you went straight to the feature. And there were no tire rules back then, so you qualified on soft tires, you raced on hard tires because it was 50 laps. So we're going straight from qualifying, and the first midget race that Jeff ever drove on a paved track was the 50-lap night before the 500. And we started 12th, and my instructions were, with hard tires, full fuel tank, my instructions were, Jeff, unless something breaks on the car, all I want to do is see you go under the checkered flag, and we'll see where we go from there. Well, as many of us know, and I was so fortunate to be able to be involved in that, the rest was history.
Now, I heard a story that as Jeff moved up the ladder of success in driving, when he wasn't able to make a race, you called your former best man at your wedding to sit in for him. Is that true?
Yes. Later on that year, Jeff's career at that time, he was more interested in running the World of Outlaws. And he had a ride with Stan Schaff. Sprint car fans remember that, the orange, I believe it was 23 car. And the one that Frankie Kerr really made famous. So Jeff was driving that car, and it was Knoxville Nationals weekend. And that was fine with me, Jeff running the sprint car, because I didn't want to run all the midget races because of my business and my family. And so Jeff called me. We were going to hit the Knoxville Nationals Saturday night. We're going to run the Springfield Mile with the midgets on Sunday afternoon. And so Saturday afternoon, Jeff calls me, and he says, Raleigh, he says, I got a problem. He said, it's raining in Knoxville, and I got a feeling we're going to get rained out, and we're probably going to run this race tomorrow, and I'm not going to make it to Springfield. So I called Steve, and I said, hey, Steve, because I knew he wasn't running Springfield. So I called him. I said, hey, I said, you want to come over to Springfield and run my car tomorrow? So Steve said, sure. And I said, well, here's the deal. If Knoxville runs tonight, Jeff will be there. If they get rained out, then I need you to drive the car at Springfield. So, okay, that's fine. So about 10 o'clock that night, I get a call from Jeff, and he says, Raleigh, he says, I'll be at Springfield tomorrow. Oh, good. I said, did you get the race in? He said, no, I got fired out of my sprint car.
So you almost had your first ride. Now, you won the night before the 500 several times.
Yeah, it was in 82, and I know I finished second a few times there too. I always liked Raceway Park real well, and the Copper Classic out at Phoenix on the mile, won that one too. But the big win, I think, is the starting field is the largest starting field ever for a midget race with 62 cars at the DuQuoin Mile, and I did win that, and that was a dirt race.
You won several times at the Speedrome. I mean, you go from from one end to the other, a little tiny bull ring to the bigger ones.
Yep, I had success there too. So I just anywhere we tried to run, always had had very good equipment. And but when I was racing for all the years I was chasing the circuit, it was a father and son. It was just my dad and myself.
Yeah, I know. I told you I pulled up the record. I think USAC had or something. It's about 17 pages, and I saw Raleigh's name pop in every so often. But it was you and your dad, many races.
Yes, and in fact, I've got Raleigh. Anytime Raleigh wanted me to drive for him, he said, "Go down and get a new uniform." So I've got I must have a half a dozen or more uniforms that says Harold Supermarkets on the back of them.
How did your dad get you involved? Did he race and run a grocery store as well?
No, he just he had been to some races back after World War II. You know, Steve and I are a generation where probably our parents served during World War II, and of course midget racing was very popular then, and so he sort of got affixed with midget racing, and he just thought that'd be fun for he and I to go to the midget races, and then maybe I remember the first midget race he ever took me to was at Hobstadt, Tri-State Speedway, St. Louis Auto Racing Association, and I remember there was a midget down there that was sponsored by Zero Candy Bars, and the guy that drove it was named Jimmy Millmaker, and from that day on I always ate Zero Candy Bars. But no, we'd go to Hobstadt, we'd go to Terre Haute and Salem, and you know, it was a really great time when families would go to races, and that still goes on today, but that's a big fabric of our sport.
Both of you graduated from Indiana University, IU, and I also heard a rumor that when you were there, of all things, you two roomed together. Boy, that had to be a real joy.
Well, we did. After I almost went to the University of Miami down in Florida, and but my dad told me, he says, now, if it was right up to when school was about to start, he said, now, if you stay at home or go to school closer to home, we can race cars, and because we didn't have a race car at the time. And he said, so I'm sure he was trying to keep me around home there a little closer. But he said, if you're going to go that far away, he said, I expect you to stay there, and then we'll start, if you want to race when you graduate or get out, then we'll go racing. So I got to think, I went all the way through, went through registration down in Florida and everything. And I got to thinking about it, and I said, no, this isn't what I want to do. So put everything back in, and it was too late to get into Indiana at the time, so there was that junior college down there in Vincennes. So I ran down there, got in registration, and got my housing the same day, and started class the next day. So I did get in, and then pretty soon I started getting these little notes on my windshield. Oh, I'm a fan of racing, or I owned a race car, a sprint car, and he said, I'd like to talk to you sometime. Well, I didn't pay any attention to it, but finally he caught up with me, and it's been a great relationship ever since. So,
did you have in the back of your mind any time you'd like to run the 500?
Oh, I do, and I had 3 opportunities there where I thought they were kind of opportunities, but each time somebody came up with a big figure of money to buy the ride out from under me. But I had 3 close ones there, and just always regret not getting the opportunity.
You raced for about 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. Somewhere.
Well, if you started when I was about 6, 7 years old, running the quarter midgets, and continuing on to when I finally quit there in my late 30s.
And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen you at many short tracks. There was quite a period after you retired that you didn't go to a racetrack.
No, in fact, we got through Hunterdon Raceway Park one night, and it was at the point where I was talking with my dad, and we either was going to have to spend quite a bit of money getting new equipment and to be more competitive than what we were. And so we thought, I said, you know, I'm satisfied with our racing career, and he was too. So, but at the time we was only running a half a dozen races anyway, so we decided to call it quits right then. And then it was over 8 years, and in fact it was Dick Jordan sitting over there that called me. It was the 50th running of the night before the 500 race, and they wanted all the former winners to be there that night. So he called me, and that was the first race I went back to in that length of time.
Who was some of the toughest guys that you raced against? I mean, you raced against some of the best in the business at that time. There was some really
Well, we
good
sure
ones.
did, and I tell you what, back when I raced, you couldn't pick out one or two or three. You had to beat them all. And you know, back then, you'd go to just their weekly show or one of the events that were on USAC. When I won the midget title, they had to run 50 races to win the title. And but you'd go to Santa Fe Park or anywhere where was Little Springfield, there would always be 45 cars or better trying to get into those 20 starting spots. So every night you'd have a lot of top racers sitting on the sidelines not making the race that night. And but back when I hit it, was doing it, it was Mel Kenyon and Richie Vogler and Mike Gregg and so.
Did you ever run against Kevin Olson?
Oh, Kevin Randy, he's definitely a character, but
That's being nice.
but he was a lot of fun to be around. He always is, and especially when he started his light bulb repair service. I thought that was one of his best things that he had.
Raleigh, what got you to accept becoming president of the United States Auto Club? Because you had a bunch of, members and owners and drivers, and everybody's complains about everything. What in the world ever made you want to become president of that organization?
Oh, there's a fine line between guts and stupidity, and some people don't know the difference. No, actually, I was there for 6 years, and I really cherished those 6 years. And I hope that, I was able to contribute something to the sport in that way. And still, we all have a great and deep love for USAC racing. It's the best there is. I mean, people who haven't been to a USAC midget or a USAC sprint car race, especially on dirt, they don't know what they're missing. And, it's amazing when, like, some of the European people or South American people or something go. But anyway, what had happened was, in 2001, we all know how competitive retailing is, and I had the opportunity to sell my grocery stores to Kroger. And Kroger asked me to stay on, but I knew it just wouldn't be the same. And we were very fortunate in that we were living in Vincennes, and so I turned down the Kroger offer. And I had my USAC Silver Crown car I was racing then that Bud Kading was driving. So that kept me pretty busy during the summer, and I was really kind of deciding, well, what am I going to do next, be it another business venture or whatever. And then I got a call from Tony George, and he said, Johnny Caples is going to retire, and we're looking for candidates to be the president of USAC. And so I said something to my wife. I said, well, this would mean that we would have to move to Indianapolis, and she was all for it. And fortunately, what had happened was our youngest daughter had just graduated from high school, so we were about to become empty nesters. So I accepted the position, and I was there from 2002 to 2008.
Now you work for the governor and the motorsports economic development. What does that entail? Do you go out looking for teams or manufacturers that come in here?
I'm not really doing all that now. I'm still involved in anything with motorsports. My current position, I work for the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is the Department of Commerce. And I'm the senior vice president in charge of all business development, all the marketing, taking Indiana to the world and bringing the world to Indiana, and all of our innovation and entrepreneurship activities. And I was originally hired by Governor Daniels, and I'll never forget, and this may have been the last time I was here, was when you had Governor Daniels on, and it was right at the end of his being governor. And it had just been announced that he was going to become the president of Purdue University. And Don, you'll remember this. You asked him, you said, well, now, Governor, we heard you were going to run for president of the United States, and now we hear you're going to be president of Purdue University. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to be president of Purdue University? And he said, yes, I am, and I held out for a better job. And I'll never forget that. That was a great question, Don. But
Remember
no,
that answer, yeah.
I'll have to say now with Governor Holcomb, and I don't want to get political, but he's a great person to work for. He loves racing. One of his best friends and old high school buddies is Tim Cindric, and they get together every time Tim's in town. This past year, his first year, he attended every race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was at the ARCA race at Lucas Oil Raceway. He was at the U.S. Nationals. And we were in France promoting the very vibrant aviation aerospace industry in Indiana. We were at the Paris Air Show. And we were fortunate in that the 24 Hours of Le Mans was the weekend before the Paris Air Show. And so the governor had asked me, he said, now when are you going to Paris? Because he said, I want to go to the air show. And I said, well, I'm going a couple days early. And he said, well, are you going to see the Eiffel Tower and be a tourist? And I said, well, no. I said, I'm going a couple days early because I'm going down to Le Mans to go to the 24 Hours. And he looked up and he said, can I go too? And so we were fortunate. We rode the train down from Paris down to Le Mans this summer, and we were the guests of the track and had a great time down there. He had a great time, so he went to all those races, and then he finished up his racing season at the school bus figure eights at the Anderson Speedway. So he truly is a race fan.
Strangely enough, another one of his fine friends is none other than the irrepressible Bruce Walkup. And Bruce has contacted me a couple times, and he's talked to the governor, and he said he will be here. So when you see him, remind him. And Bruce called me a couple weeks ago and said, have you heard from his executive assistant? I said, no. He said, I'll take care of it. Haven't heard yet. But he said he'd be here, so it'd be interesting to talk to him. You know, there's something about racing. I don't know what it is, that once you get into it, you know, it's just difficult. I mean, like yourself, for 30 years you race, and you quit, and it's not the same. You don't get this. You don't want to go back and watch everybody else. You're not a good spectator, and it's just something about the sport. Whereas other sports, you see guys come back and you see them on the sidelines at football games or in the stand, but a racer, generally, when he packs it in, you don't see him much.
No, I tell you, I've always been that way with, especially my sport. But if I'm not participating, it's just not the same. And it's when you've come back after being away from it for a lot of years, it's a whole different group of people, and
They're much younger.
much younger, of course. But at least when you got older, you still can sit around with the same people you knew, and you can bench race. And like I said, it was a lot of enjoyment back in those days because everybody tend to help each other, and there were so many more people involved with it back in those days too. So today, what gets me about midget racing today, they only have 15, 20 cars come to the race, and they come in with these great big semis with one little car in the back end of these semis, and they've got all this support gear and everything else. They got 20 mechanics with each one of them, and yet they're spending $50,000-$60,000 for a motor and everything, all the expense of it, and yet they're still running for the same purse that I was running for.
Yeah, that's not far wrong. You're right there. And you're right. The
So,
cost, it's amazing. But to me, as far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest sport there is because everybody has to do their job. The driver is the guy that's going to end up over the fence, as some people have noted. So it's a fun sport. It's a great sport. When I used to go. I didn't run. When I used to go, I was when Andy Granatelli was promoting races at Soldier Field, and I knew Freddie Lorenzen when he started his career as a local stock car guy. And it's just something about motorsports. I think it's spectacular.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, the group that's doing it now, they're having probably just as much fun, and it means just as much to them as it did to us. And it's just a different generation. That's their racing.
But you're right. In your area, they used to help each other. You'd be at a motel and you'd see guys trading, but at the same time, if somebody did something to you, you didn't hesitate to go in the pit area with a 2x4 and let's get this straightened out.
There you go. There you go.
Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to come here. I know I've had a lot of people say, why don't we bring some of the guys in that help build the open wheel short track thing, so you're my first two guests, and I appreciate it. So I want to thank Steve Lacha and Raleigh Helmling.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks for being here. My next guest is on his way up, and I will remind you that we're also presented by Sam Pierce Chevrolet in Daleville, Indiana. You got to come to the country to see why the best prices are actually in the country in Daleville. And you'll find out why Sam Pierce is always rated at the top of customer satisfaction. You just take I-65 north or 69 north to exit 34 and go east 1 mile, and you won't miss him. You'll see him. He's right there. You want to find out what these guys and gals like about racing? Take a ride in the two-seater from the Indy Racing Experience. And give their office a call. The number is 317-243-7171. Ask for Shonda, or you can go online to the IndyRacingExperience.com, pick out a date, and in the promo box, or when you talk to Shonda, tell SJ1, you get a 50% discount. If you are a vintage car buff, and they run a lot of the open wheel cars now, the SVRA brings them in, you might want to subscribe to the Vintage Racing Quarterly. Go to svra.com and subscribe to it. It's a great magazine, first class published magazine, and it's got some really great stories. You'll want to look into it. It's really well worth it. And the first race is upcoming at the Roebling Road Raceway in Bloomingdale, Georgia. It's the 2018 Bob Williams Heritage Cup and Driving School. If you're in that area, around the Atlanta area, make sure you get out there. And then March 1st to the 4th, down at Sebring International, the 2018 Sebring Vintage Classic will be taking place. So do yourself a favor. Go check them out. My next guest is on his way up, and I think all of you will be very pleased to hear from this gentleman. He's been here before. Turn one of the mics off. It's amazing. He is a doctor, a PhD, but for some reason he's also an athletic supporter. I mean, a real athlete. I see him on Facebook, and he'll be down seeing the Jayhawks play in Kansas, or he'll be at a Pacer basketball game, or he'll be at a Colts game, or he'll be at the Indians game. And fortunately for him, his wife enjoys it as much as he does.
True.
He travels around in sports, and if you've been to a racetrack anywhere in central Indiana or in the Midwest, you've probably heard him on the PA. He's as knowledgeable as anybody I know in the world of motorsports. Please welcome Dr. Pat Sullivan.
Thank you, Don. Good to be here.
As being in the psychology business, I guess, do you analyze drivers and say, what in the world are you doing here?
No.
Good idea.
No, I try to keep my work and pleasure separate.
What got you started? Did anybody in your family race, or what got your love for racing? Because
No,
you
I-
obviously do.
No, and you nailed it. I have, and I still love most all sports. Very few that I don't like, and racing was one of them. But as a story I've told many times, I saw a race at the Tulsa Fairgrounds, a packed place. In fact, I'm very sad. And those of you who went to the Chili Bowl, I actually went over to the fairgrounds track, and they've dismantled essentially the grandstands, and it's all but gone. But I saw a race which would be deemed a super modified race in that particular part of the country. and it featured Emmett Hahn, who's the current promoter of the Chili Bowl Nationals, and Ray Crawford, who is the patriarch of a great racing family, who were the two hot shoes. Ray Crawford drove for Harold Hillenberg, and his son Andy Hillenberg, we called him Oklahoma Andy, was his son. And they had a race that was a barn burner, but what I most remember is that Emmett came out and half the crowd stood up and applauded, and the other half flipped him off. And Ray Crawford came out, it was just the opposite. I'd never seen anything quite like it. It was incredibly thrilling. And I think I went to the races in Kansas City the next weekend, and I never stopped.
I might mention, that I forgot to mention, that for all his work and all the time and effort and what he's done for the world of motorsports, he's been inducted into this National Sprint Car Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's very humbling. I mean, I think John's here and Dick Jordan is here and Steve's in the Midget Hall of Fame and Raleigh will be in multiple ones. You know, I think the main thing, Don, is that when something like that happens to you, you think about a number of things. You think about all the people that helped you, but you think just about how this possibly happened. And I mean, and the luck involved. I grew up in Kansas. I got my first announcing job in Missouri when I taught at what is now Missouri State University. You know, and I just met people, and the fact that I got to not only go into Gasoline Alley, which was the number one goal, just to get in it, and then to work at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and to be talking about racing in Indianapolis, to get an honor like that, to have watched Steve Lotshaw race and then sitting next to him and having a conversation with him and all these great folks, it's really sort of a miracle. So when you get an award of that nature, it's the work of a lot of people and the support of a lot of people that believed in you. And I've never forgot that. I tried to call a lot of them individually and tell them that.
As I mentioned to you when you got here, I have a copy of the January Sprint Car Midget magazine, and I read your recap of the 2017 season and how impressed you are with what's happening in sprint car racing.
I'm impressed with USAC at this point, and you know, I have a great love of USAC. I mentioned John is here. John and Dave Argerbright and I are putting a book together that's going to capture the second half, if you will. Carl Hungness had a really great book on the first 25 years of the United States Auto Club sprint cars, and Dave and John and I are going to take it forward. So I have a deep appreciation of the history and recapping events, and it's deep within me. But I'm just going to tell you, and this is something I said to Donald Davidson at Terre Haute this year. Donald Davidson and I did a little Q&A in front of the grandstands during Indiana Sprint Week, and Donald made some comment that I don't see Jim Herbees and I don't see A.J. Foyt and I don't see Pernelli Jones. And I said, yeah, but if you go back there and you're going to see Chris Windham, Chad Baisflug, Justin Grant, Chase Stockton, and Dave Darlin. And let me tell you something. We sometimes elevate the careers of drivers because they made their mark at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The fact that the guys I just mentioned aren't getting a chance to go to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway does not denigrate the fact that these guys are as talented as any sprint car driver who ever lived. And I'm telling you, these young guys are tremendous. And they're not only just tremendous, they're great people. I mean, I love these guys. I mean, they're just great young people. They're respectful. Many of them have a sense of history. They're doing this for a living and working hard at it, and they are so good. I had the chance to do about as many USAC races as I've done in a long time this year. I went to Pennsylvania twice, both with the midgets and the sprints, and I did all the Silver Crown races. I went out the West, and John's here and Dick's here. It's jaw-dropping how good they are, how brave they are, how much passion they bring to the sport. It's Levi Jones is doing a tremendous job. The shows are being run crisply in a short time frame. He keeps the program going. They're blowing a horn saying, get your car out to the line. The programs are over at a decent hour. It's great stuff. I'm telling you, I am as enthusiastic and fired up about racing right now as I've been at any time in my life.
It seems to me, if I remember right, that a sprint car engine is cheaper than a midget engine.
Well, they're both expensive. I think you're at the tall
they're not
end.
free.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is, and Steve nailed it, and I think all of us scratch our heads sometimes at the economics of it. I mean, racing, you asked me about the psychology. Racing doesn't make any sense. Racing doesn't make any sense for a fan. It doesn't make any sense for a participant. I used to drive all night to go to these races when I was a fan. And I'd be driving home. I had to go to work on Monday, and it's Sunday, and it's 1:30 in the morning, and I'm driving around Caney, Kansas, and there's one light on. The only person that's awake besides me. And I just drove 500 miles to some little dirt oval scratched in the ground in Lawton, Oklahoma to watch guys go in a circuit real fast. What sense does it make? It's an irrational sport. It's an irrational, emotional sport that breeds passion. The thing that drives me the most crazy is we need to have people in charge of the sport that are emotional, irrational, and passionate, and not people that are marketers and just worried about the image thing. No, it's an irrational sport. Now, clearly, some of the drivers in the United States Auto Club midget ranks are having opportunities to the next level. I mean, Keith Kunz right now is a star maker. I mean, he got Kyle Larson, who came as a polished guy, but now we know where Christopher Bell won the truck championship last year. He's on his way forward. So Keith gets those guys. He teaches them how to race. He teaches them how to behave. He teaches them how to deal with the media. And that's a ticket maybe somewhere else. So when that's available, then somebody is going to pull resources together. But when the very first time Ronnie Householder got an Offenhauser engine and won the Turkey Night Grand Prix, there has been an engine war in midget racing from that point forward. That has never changed. How it survived, I don't know. But it's an expensive sport that requires irrational people to want to be involved.
Do you not agree that of all the team sports, this is probably the number one, because the crew you have, whether it's 2 or 3 guys or 10 on an IndyCar or 12, everybody's got to do their job, because you got a guy behind the wheel that if you've forgotten something or didn't do it right, he could be in trouble.
You know, I of all the people that could have said this in all the years that, as you know, my opportunity to work at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I'll never forget Billy Boat saying to me, he says, very few people understand what it's like to go down this front straightaway with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at 225, probably was accurate when he said there, plus miles an hour, and hoping the car sticks. And hoping the car sticks means that you absolutely believed that the people who were behind you made all the right decisions. And that is the ultimate trust keep. I saw this film clip of this idiotic Eagles fan that did the trust fall off of an awning in downtown Philadelphia. That took a lot of trust that those people were going to catch him. Not near as much trust as those guys have over at 16th and Georgetown when they get in those race cars. Then I have to make sure that those guys did all the right things.
Yeah, because when he jumped off of that, I thought, well, if they don't catch him, at least he'll land on something.
Well, that's true. His head.
But when you hit the wall at the speedway at that speed, that hurts.
That hurts very badly, yes.
How did you manage? Now, I said you're a PhD, and you didn't do that in a week. It took a lot of time and effort to do it. How did you fit racing? Was that what you did to get away from your studies?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I got a PhD. So what? I mean, it's what I do. I'm a college professor. I have admiration for the guy that knows how to strip and wax a floor well. I have an admiration for a plumber, a builder, a car mechanic. I don't care what you do, as long as you do it the best you can. And I like to read. I like to do research. I like to think. Being a college professor is like the greatest job in the face of the earth. I deal with talented and bright young people all the time. It's just a wonderful job. But I fit it in like everybody else fits everything else in. I tried to use my time as best I could.
You have a son out in Colorado who's some friends of mine. I heard what he was doing, and they lived nearby. They used to go visit him. And I talked to him, and I said, "You've been over to see Reed?" And he said, "He's not there." So where the hell did he go? We don't know. So I asked you, and you said, "He's moving on." I said, "Is he going to is he going to school?" No, he's got a different
It's really funny, and I bet I got a lot of folks here that will attest to this. I have 2 children, and things that I teach, a lot of my students always feel that parents shape everything. And the reality is the children are born, they got minds and wills of their own, and you try to be a snow fence that guides them in some direction. So I've got a daughter who was a valedictorian at Carmel High School. She graduated #1 from her class at Franklin College. She's got a master's degree at the University of Illinois and hours towards a PhD at the University of Illinois. White knuckles it all the time. My son, who is probably a postmodern hippie, lives at 8,200 feet. He's a chef. He's an outstanding cook. He snowmobiles. He skis. He hikes. He curls. He was a great hockey player. He played junior hockey in Canada, and he worries about nothing. So, yeah, he's a chef up at the El Dorado, a ski resort in Colorado.
And you still play hockey from time to time.
Yeah, I play tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
Tomorrow morning. That's a Wednesday. You don't have classes?
I have class Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, okay.
I try not to get hurt. Although, Don, this is something I probably have a car wreck on the way home. This is my 29th year of teaching, and I've never canceled a class. So I plan to be there.
What's the feeling now? You watch racers, watch race drivers and mechanics. You see how they work on a car and all the work they go through. What's it like to be an educator and have these kids sitting there listening and learning from you? That's got to be, to me, it would be as exciting as putting together a race car that could win a race.
Listen, it's like everything else in life, and anybody who's ever done this, I know the Mahoney's has had a daughter who taught school, which is, I've added 20, 25 students. There's 5 of them, 6 of them hang on every word that I say, and they're very interested in doing very well. There's the 5 or 6 or 7 that I could bring in the Russian Ballantine dancing bears, and they probably still want to look at their phone and buy something on Amazon.com. And then there's some in the middle that you try to move in one direction. But we have all the pictures of our graduates on the wall, and late at night, if I'm in my office late at night, I sometimes walk in the hall and I look at the picture, and I look at the picture of the student who kind of makes me feel warm. And you have that. I mean, the greatest feeling as an educator, and we have a lot of young, and I do a lot of research and I publish a lot, but we've got a lot of young educators today whose #1 thing they want to do is to get out of teaching. They want to get enough research money that they don't have to go in the classroom. And I told one of them the other day, if I ever went to commencement and I didn't want to have a student have their picture taken with me or have me meet their mom and dad, then it would be time for me to quit. So in every class, there is someone who you think to yourself, and this is really true, particularly I'm a first-generation college student, when you have a young person who may not realize how bright they are or how bright they can be. I'm a hard teacher, by the way, because I was a dull, normal guy who worked hard, and I had a mentor who leaned hard on me and asked me to be the best I could be. And I've tried to follow that through in everything I do, to be just the level best I could be. I want somebody who ends up being a star, an academic star, a leader, and a leader in our community who never thought that that was possible for them because no one had sort of pressed on them and told them they could be that. That's the great moment as an educator. When you watch that kid walk across the stage and shake the dean's hand, that's a great moment. I get emotional talking about it.
Yeah, I see that. How did you become the media guy at the Speedway?
It was luck. It was pure luck, and this is probably how it all panned out. If I could put all the pieces together, it just shows you what I described earlier. I was working at I-44 Speedway in Lebanon, Missouri. United States Auto Club came to town. I was a big fan. And Bill Marvel grabs me and says, "You really know this stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, I like it." And he says, "We need to get you in Indianapolis." And I said, "Well, I applied once, and it was early in my career, and I said I didn't get an interview. I said I'd like to get there." And he said, "Would you like a job at the Speedway?" And I said, "You got to be kidding me." Well, he got me a job on the certification crew, which no longer exists, but I tried to do that very well. But what happened is that, Tony Stewart had helped me get a job with the UMRA TQ midgets. Mike Miles of Bloomington Speedway hired me sight unseen. And then Ron Green came down with USAC and with Dick Jordan, and he liked the work that Brad and I were doing. He got us in at Raceway Park, and suddenly we're getting a lot of work. So I doing a lot of races. Well, the dawn of the Indy Racing League comes, and obviously that's where some of these guys were coming from. And Josh Laycock was working at that time in the public relations department, and he convinced his boss, Paul Kelly, that we got a guy that's working in this other department that we really need in our department. He really knows these guys, and he knows who they are, and he can talk to them and get quotes for us. And so they asked me to be a part of that. And then Ron Green just thought that because of the fact that I was an announcer and I interviewed people that I would be naturally slide in a position that really Bill Marvel had done for a number of years. And so, and you talk about that. I mean, I've done this for 20 years now. And still I'm doing an interview and I'm sitting there going, I'm interviewing Emerson Fittipaldi. How did this happen? Or I was assigned to Michael Schumacher when Formula One came. I did a one-on-one with Michael Schumacher. How'd this happen? It's luck. There's the old saying that, luck is when, opportunity meets preparation. I try to be prepared. But I just fell into it. And what a thing to fall into.
I'm going to confess to something. When you're interviewing the drivers, introduce them and everything, you ask 3 or 4 questions.
Right.
You make me mad because you usually ask the one that I had in mind to go like this, and you've already asked.
Well, and that's an interesting thing because, it's to be real dicey with that issue because there's a couple things come into play. One is in the early days with the IndyCar series, Fred Nation used to grab me and Brad and say, we need to go to the press conference and ask questions because they couldn't get anybody to ask questions. The other thing that happens is I'm really sensitive to is that we've got, we got Sage Karam and we've got Scott Dixon. Well, 95% of the questions are to Scott Dixon, and I get worried about poor Sage. We got to try to treat everyone the same, so sometimes I try to set up things that way. The other, what I think is the most interesting phenomena in those press conferences is that sometimes it's the person from the mom and pop newspaper from the middle of Illinois asks a question, and all the professional journalists are like, they're rolling their eyes. They're guffawing and everything. And sometimes it's the silliest question or the most basic question that elicits the most interesting answer. I remember one journalist asked Paul Tracy what stagger meant. Well, hell, I knew what stagger meant, and I thought, oh boy, a question about stagger. Paul Tracy then proceeded to give the most interesting 10-minute talk about stagger I have ever heard in my life. And I learned something by listening to it. So I always want to make sure that we prime the pump. And for a long time, Don, we brought those people down there after they qualified. There'd be 2 people down there. And this is the opportunity for the journalists to get things, and it gets piped upstairs. And I just wanted to make sure they'd come back. But I'm sorry that I did that to you.
No, I'm not, because then I got to think of something else. And I like to follow what you do. If you got a Scott Dixon and a Sage Karam, full well who's going to get the question.
Oh, yeah.
So I try and ask, hopefully an interesting one.
Right.
After doing this, I come up with something to involve them and get an answer.
Sure.
And I try to give something that's not a yes and no.
Right.
You got to give it where they got to expound a little bit. So I'm only kidding about that.
That's okay. It's such an honor. And I think the thing that I've tried to convey to all my bosses in Indianapolis, all of them, it's such an honor to work there. I feel the same way every time I drive under that tunnel as I did the first time. And when I walk upstairs, I pinch myself because I know the thousands of people who would love to have that opportunity. So I've never, ever taken it for granted. It's just wonderful. Yeah, the 500's different. It's different. But you know what? It's still the Indianapolis 500. And because some of those people came up a way differently than the way some of my heroes did, it doesn't mean a whole lot of them didn't work really hard to get there, because they did.
Oh, yeah, no question. And speaking of being excited when you're driving, I went to the Ganassi press conference today, and I thought the same thing. I do every time I go by there. I go, God, I can't believe I'm driving.
That's right. And that's something.
And I drove in there today, and I went, geez, it's like being the first
That's
time.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had a granddaughter who came and ran the mini marathon.
Uh-huh.
And I said, what you're going to find is, what you want to do is pay attention when you get to the speedway. Oh, yeah, it's just, okay. So she went out and ran it. She came back, she said, oh, my God, that place is huge.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of the other things that I got to do, which was incredible, I worked for Al Michaels twice, Brent Musburger and Gannon. I think it was Terry Gannon, great guy. But the very first time that I got to work for ABC as Al Michaels' personal assistant, they put me in the old race control, which is the top. And it wasn't until that time, until I looked down, that I really did realize how narrow it really was. I mean, that was sort of awe-inspiring as well, to look down there and realize that no matter how wide it seems to us when you're on the ground, when you get up there, it's pretty narrow for those race cars.
Yeah, and the thing that hooked me when I went first time in 1961, because I didn't want to go to the race. It was cold, it rained, and I said, if you're lucky, hurry back after the race. There'll be some beer left if you're fast. Well, they talked me into going, and I sat up in the Tower Terrace all the way at the end by turn 4. And when those cars came out of turn 4, that's it. I'm still here.
Oh yeah,
And it's just something about that place. It's magic.
well, and the entire build up with the pre-race ceremonies. I mean, you can really sort of tell who gets it and who doesn't by looking at their face at that particular time. I think, when I was a kid, the worst day in the world was December 26th. As an adult, the worst day in the world is the day after the Indianapolis 500.
Well, I'm hoping Alex said he'd be here next week because they're sending the green flag on a world tour.
Yeah.
And they're going to send it around. I said, are you going to put it in a bag and give it to the pilot and have somebody pick it up? He said, there'll be somebody with it most of the time.
Good.
And I got an email from, you probably know Willie Kay.
Mm-hmm.
He sent me an email. He said, is that flag going to, can it come to New Zealand? I said, how would I know? But I'll find out.
All right.
So I got a hold of him, and they said, we have nobody to contact. I said, yes, you do.
That's funny.
So he's supposed to have contacted him today. So it'll be interesting, but I want to find out what their plan is. And I had an idea. I said, when you come back on race day, you got to get a world-class runner. Take the flag around the track, and then go underneath by the media center, come up and then climb up on the flag stand and hand the flag to the starter. I hadn't thought of that's an idea.
That is a good idea.
It'll be funny to see and fun to see. And what is it about that? I don't know. It's one of the most exciting things that I've said this before. Is 4 or 5 years ago they had 100 and some Medal of Honor winners.
Yes.
I got to shake your hand every one of them.
Yeah,
What a thrill.
amazing, isn't it?
What a thrill.
Oh, you betcha it is.
It's fantastic, and I congratulate you with, I have before on your induction into the Sprint Car Hall of Fame. Well deserved. There's not many tracks in the country. You go out to Sonoma and you think, well, who's on the PA? It's you.
Yeah.
And you go, you travel the country. I used to go down and just sit and listen to you and Brad down at Bloomington.
Yeah. 25th year this year for Brad and I there.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and the contribution you've made and what you bring to it and the history that you bring that a lot of guys don't know, but when they're sitting and listening, say, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, the people who made the contribution, and I said this in my induction, I'm honored, and I've had a little slice of the sport, and I tried to do it well, but the people who made the contribution are the people that did it. I mean, it's Steve, and it's Raleigh who owned a car, and the people, the Twisted Riches, and Bill and Stephanie, and people that Dave and his work with the safety crew, and Dix is a longtime media guy. I've had just a privileged position, but I think I know who the stars are, and I really appreciate what they've done. I think they're remarkable people. It's a great sport, and it's a great sport full of great people.
And one of your good friends, and the picture I put on my website was you and Tony Stewart howling about something. But you and Tony have been connected for a long time.
Yeah, the story has been well told now. I did Victory Lane in his very first sprint car win at the I-44 Speedway. That's where I met him. And I go to do the interview with him, and he says, dude, I can't get out of the car. And I said, what do you mean, Tony? He says, you got interviewed? And he goes, I peed my pants on the parade lap. I said, you're 100 yards away and you got a black uniform. So all of you guys all know Tony well, so you can know how this went over. So USAC came back, and I went down and I said, hey, Tony, no problem. I got an extra pair of pants in the car. And you can imagine Tony creatively strung about 16 swear words together. But he's been a really good friend of mine, and he's just been good to me throughout his career. And I know there's times he's misbehaved. I know there's times when he said things he wished he hadn't. I know there's times when he might have been curt with people and he doesn't. But I'll tell you, I know the good things he's done. And I know the good things that he's done behind the scenes that very, very few people know. He has helped so many people without the spotlight being turned on him, that he's got a lifetime pass for me. And he has just been tremendous to me personally. And that was funny. He made some. One time I was doing driver introductions, the NASCAR, the Kroger 200 at Raceway Park, and I'm standing there and I'm serious. I'm uptight. It's showtime and all that. And before Tony came over and he yanked a hair out of the back of my arm, of course, it made me jump about 5 feet in the air. He thought that was really funny. At Sonoma, he came around the corner and he squirted a water bottle on me. It never stops. It's good, though.
And you're right. I've had his mother on here a couple times, and she said if people knew what he did, and
It's unbelievable.
how he's helped people, but he doesn't care. He doesn't want to be known.
His love of animals and pets and
huge.
is just it's tremendous. I mean, you know what? I don't want a vanilla individual. We all have warts, and all of us have times that we're not necessarily proud of what we've done or what we've been. On the balance, we try to do the right things, and on the balance, he's done far more good than anything else.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
And people don't know it, but somebody like you, when you say it, you know what he's done.
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy.
And I've heard, it's great. Listen, I want to thank you for
Thank you for having
taking
me,
the
Don.
time. Always enjoy talking to you. I look forward to coming down and listening and making a list of 2 or 3 questions in case you grab one of them. I'll have a couple.
All right, that's good. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to meet with all these people again. Thank you.
Dr. Pat Sullivan, thanks for being here. We will be here next week again. I don't know if Howdy Bell can get out of bed 2 weeks in a row. I think has he got my girl with him? Oh yeah, he does. Okay, I'm happy she's here with him. Next week, as I said, my first scheduled guest, as far as I know, is going to be Alex Damrod, and we're going to talk about taking a green flag on a tour of the world. And I've heard some of the place it's going. It's going to be amazing. Working on a couple other guests. So as I say, when you get a chance, look at autosportradio.com, pull up the Autosport Radio tab, and you'll see who the guests are. When I get them up, I put them up. So until next week, Don Kay say thanks for being here. Thanks for watching and listening. See you next week. Good night.